So the DINI was a research data cloud pilot, and the approach we took was looking at national infrastructure systems, which is a huge area. So we narrowed that down somewhat, even though it's still quite a large area to cover, focusing on the energy, water and transport sectors specifically. We took a situational analysis approach to this, and we had design studies, demonstrators, benefits realisation, and the situational analysis, we really concentrated on the benefits and barriers to the data sharing, exchange and reuse as one of the key components, which is really a lot of what we'll talk about today. We had multiple partners involved in this project, and I think one of the things that Ollie said, they were relatively short period of time we did this. We had about a year, roughly, wasn't it? So it was really quite time constrained to pack in an awful lot of work. So we felt that we really needed a good evidence base. Everybody talks about data sharing, everybody talks about barriers. There's been a lot of work in the past. There was a lot of work in 2017 and onwards, and Sarah's talked about barriers and benefits and data sharing generally, but we wanted to really deep dive into what an evidence base could do to help us in these sectors. So we did a lot of collecting of evidence. We had a number of work streams with partners organised by the Digital Curation Centre. We took a regional approach to these, and we had looked at Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, because we wanted to know if there are differences, because as you probably know, there are different regulatory environments in Northern Ireland and Scotland. We also looked at some digital twins. We commissioned Icebreaker One, who did a really great literature review. They did a load of surveys and interviews and workshops, and they also talked to industry as well. UKRI did some workshops, and we did a very small, specific workshop for the energy sector, looking at modelling as a particular key area of barriers and challenges, which was a follow-on work from some work they'd previously done on data sharing more generally. We had a number of champions who looked at their particular areas, and we also had 8 researcher demonstrator use cases across the water, energy and transport sectors, which really delved into these particular issues, and where we got a lot of evidence of what the actual practical issues were coming up, what the real barriers were and what the real benefits were. And we also had alongside this some technical studies around APIs for energy data, ontologies, indexing services and federating research platforms, so the more technical infrastructure when we're talking about infrastructure. So we covered all the elements of what Sarah asked us about, of what do we mean by a data infrastructure. I think we covered all of those in the DINI project. I'm not going to talk huge amounts about benefits. I think we're all kind of know there are benefits to data sharing. You have the benefit, you have the effect, and you have the impact. And I think the important thing is, although we were looking at research data clouds, this was about academic use of data, but it wasn't just in the academic community that you get the impact and the benefit. It is across society, economy and the environment. And we really want to know about how academic research can support policy development and evidence-based research practices and planning decisions, which is key in things like the sectors that we were talking about. And also within these sectors, the data flow is coming from industry, it's coming from regulatory bodies, it's coming from the public sector, it's coming into academia, and it's going back out again. So we have these really nice challenges around how we're sharing data between these different sectors who all have different purposes and needs, and how they work, which is kind of a critical thing in the barriers that we see. So we looked at the barriers, we broke them down, and the key ones around privacy and legal barriers, security, commercial, cultural and technical barriers, as been mentioned in other presentations today. One of the things that Icebreaker One did for us, which is a really good literature review, which is available publicly for people to review, and they looked at the literature between 2017 and 2024, the most recent. And I don't know if this is sad or not, but things have changed, but the barriers are still sort of there. No, we can't say, yeah, we've solved it, which is a little bit, things have got better, but there is still a long way to go. So just delving a bit into some of the barriers and the legal ones. Ollie just mentioned data sharing agreements, and so I will just pick up on that one in a little bit more. When you're doing a data sharing agreement, as I said, if it is going to take you well over a year, and that's what some of the people were saying, to actually negotiate these agreements, and you're working on a research project with a relatively short space of time, it might be a 3-year project, it might be less. If you can't get the data that you need to do your project until way into the end of your project, that has a real significant impact on what you can achieve in a research project as an academic. It isn't trivial, and it sounds trivial. And Ollie mentioned the legal agreements and the challenges there. And this also links back to the skills that we discovered and in the conversations in some of the workshops, that the academics or the people wanting to use the data understand the issues around data, they understand the risks and things, but the legal teams or the contractual teams, they actually don't have that knowledge about the benefits and risks associated with data sharing. So there's a skill set and mismatch actually across organisations, and that aware is, again, people like data stewards can help with perhaps doing some of this translation between the areas, so that we're not having to spend valuable time in legal teams and academics to try and understand each other to get to the solution we want in a timely manner to be able to do the research. We also security risks has come up, and we didn't particularly look at trusted research environments within our project because one of the other research pilots was doing so we were able to stand back and make use of that work. And I also just want to highlight here that we've always been using this phrase as open as possible, as closed as necessary when we talk about data and fair data and open data. And I think some of that thinking is shifting now in the UK and also in the European environment and data spaces and EOS and things, is thinking about as open as possible, safe as necessary, possibly, rather than closed. Slightly change of emphasis, which is coming through, and something we want to think about in the future. Commercial, this went both ways. We talked to the commercial people, and they get worried about sharing their data sometimes, about, is it good enough to share, and what is the risk if we make this data available and it gets used in something? Will the risk come back to us that the data we shared was inaccurate and that has an impact? So those are things that education and knowledge and quality issues are a real barrier for people, and as well as all the cultural things that we talk about. And some of those can be the inequality of access to data. It's easier to get data if you know the right person. So how can we remove some of those barriers? And all of these came through in the projects. So all our use case projects, the 8 projects and our workshops, we saw all the barriers coming. Not everybody had the same barrier, but all the barriers that we are aware of were mentioned, and some people had multiple barriers, some people just had one, and some of them had managed to mitigate these barriers quite successfully. And again, there's lots of technical barriers to go on, and there's a really nice quote from one of the projects. But one of the things as well is, like, data discoverability needs good metadata. You need to know what's available, you need to be able to find it, and you need to know what it means. So context is so important when we're talking about sharing. So although barriers sounds quite negative, it's actually the interesting thing, because we've identified all these barriers. So now, what can we do, and what are the recommendations? So how can we start to sort of hopefully solve some of these and have a better data sharing environment? So I'm going to hand over to Catherine now.
It was a short project, but we made a lot of recommendations, and we've split it up into 3 areas. So these ones are sort of the general recommendations for the wider landscape. And I think the themes bring out things that we've already talked about this afternoon, about the importance of working across sectors, the importance of governance and standards, advocating for benefits. Some of our findings were that the people whose data is shared don't always get the benefits of the data sharing itself, and you have to advocate to explain. You have to be quite altruistic sometimes. And I think the other really interesting thing was that researchers ought to practice what they expect suppliers to do. They should apply fair principles to their research outputs, as well as expecting suppliers to give them data that they can understand. So the next set was that if we were to build a data infrastructure, that we should work with partners to address some of the barriers Elizabeth talked about. So to help lower the barriers by managing trusted access and brokering data sharing agreements. And by making reference data sets, we could provide an opportunity so that there, instead of having lots and lots of individual interactions, there's a reference data set that more people can use, and that would reduce the barrier for people who aren't connected or don't know people, and or are new to the sector. And we could give guidance on best data publication practices and build a network of communities of practice so that people understand the same terminology and are able to share more effectively. And then finally, to address the technical bit, if there is a platform to be built, it should have a long-term plan and sustained funding. This is something that the people from the UKRI workshop were very keen on, that there's no point building a platform that's only going to last 6 months worth of funding, because the investment and the take-up won't happen if it doesn't have a long-term plan. And that for success, it's all about federation, really. It's not about building your own silo and putting all the data into the silo. It's about federating both the data repositories, that's what I mean by repositories here, federating the data, and federating trusted computing resources. But for things to work effectively, we all need to understand what the data means. The data needs to be interoperable. And that you can't just sit in a corner and say, well, this is my data interoperability framework. I thought of a really great one. If only everyone else would use it. You need to do it as a community. And I think one of the interesting things about the national infrastructure community is it's lots of communities and lots, I work at the Energy Data Centre. Energy is an easy word to say, but covers a vast amount of domains. So I think it's easy enough to say, let's do a data interoperability framework, but that is an awful lot of work. But, that doesn't mean we shouldn't start, but I think it's important. And then one of the things that came out of some of the workshops I ran was that it's quite hard to find things. You don't know where to find it. People, collect more data, write a new model because they can't find one that's already out there. So I think it's really important to provide services to enable people to discover things, especially where it's very cross-disciplinary and you might not use the same terms for the same thing. And then to go back to what Ollie said, data stewardship is really important to help grease the wheels and ease the process. And that a DINI should provide this type of expertise. So we set the report starts with a vision that says that the data infrastructure, national infrastructures, should coordinate research infrastructure and expertise to broker access to data from industry and government for useful research, because this was focused on researchers. Provide access to data via federated infrastructure, trusted repositories. Support a common data interoperability framework. Provide access to trusted computing resources. Build a network of communities of practice, and collaborate with cross-sector initiatives to build consensus, to build on Sarah's point about let's not build another new silo that doesn't connect any other silos. So this is a list of all the outputs that are publicly available. So there's the final report, and then there are some technical reports, and the ones at the bottom are from Icebreaker 1, who did all the literature review and the landscape analysis. And this is just a recognition of the team. There's lots of people. So the DAFNI team led and coordinated it. I work at the Energy Data Centre, which is a capability of the UK Energy Research Centre. We have colleagues from Jasmine, the Digital Curation Centre, Icebreaker 1 and UKRI. That's all we have to say.